Commander Lyra Chen stood at the edge of the landing platform and watched the twin suns of Verath Prime sink below the horizon, painting the alien sky in shades of purple and gold that she had never seen on Earth or any human colony world she had visited before. She had spent 15 years fighting in the Galactic Wars, commanding warships and leading soldiers into battle against enemies that would haunt her dreams forever. And now here she was, on a peaceful alien world, with a new mission that seemed almost like a joke when she first heard it. Teaching cubs. Not human children, but the young of the Kalori, a species of towering lion-like beings who had only recently signed the peace accords and joined the galactic community after centuries of isolation on their homeworld. The Kalori were magnificent and terrifying creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with golden fur and amber eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Muscle and their hands ending in claws that could tear through steel armor like paper. They were apex predators, the most dangerous species in this sector of the galaxy, and they had never lost a war until humanity came along and fought them to a standstill through sheer stubbornness and clever tactics. Now they were allies, though many on both sides still harbored doubts about the arrangement. Lyra turned away from the sunset and walked toward the massive stone building that served as the Eastern Nursery Hold, where she would spend the next year as an educator and cultural ambassador. The assignment had come directly from the Galactic Council, and she had tried to refuse it at first because she was a soldier and not a teacher. But the Council had insisted that she was perfect for the job. "You survived 3 years as a prisoner of the Sketh Collective," Admiral Morrison had told her during the briefing, "and you came back with your mind intact, and your spirit unbroken. So if anyone can handle a classroom full of alien predator children, it is you." She was not so sure about that. The doors of the nursery hold opened before her, and she stepped into a vast chamber lit by glowing crystals embedded in the walls, where a dozen pairs of amber eyes turned to look at her with curiosity and suspicion. The cubs were small compared to their adult counterparts, standing only about a meter tall, but they still had the sharp features and proud bearing of their species, their fur ranging from pale silver to deep bronze, and their ears twitching as they studied this strange, soft-skinned creature who had come to teach them. Standing beside them was Elder Matriarch Serena, the oldest and most respected leader of the Kalori people, her fur streaked with gray and her eyes holding the weight of centuries. "So this is the human they have sent us," Serena rumbled, her voice so deep that Lyra could feel it vibrating in her chest. "A small thing with no claws and flat teeth and skin that looks like it would tear at the slightest touch." Lyra met the ancient warrior's gaze without flinching, because she had faced far worse than disapproval in her lifetime. "I am Commander Lyra Chen," she said in a calm and steady voice, "and I am honored to be here among your people, and to have the chance to teach your young ones." "Why should we trust our cubs to you?" Serena demanded, taking a step closer until she towered over the human woman like a mountain of fur and muscle. "You are weak, by any measure we use, and our children are the most precious thing we have." Lyra smiled then, a small and knowing smile that seemed to confuse the matriarch. "Because humans do not need claws to protect what we love," she answered simply, "and because sometimes the strongest guardian is not the one with the sharpest teeth, but the one who will never give up." Serena stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in those ancient amber eyes, though Lyra could not tell if it was respect or merely amusement. "Very well," the matriarch said at last. "You may begin your lessons tomorrow, but know that I will be watching, and I will know if you fail my grandchildren." With that, the old warrior turned and walked away, leaving Lyra alone with 12 cubs who were now whispering among themselves in their own language. One of the cubs stepped forward, a small female with patchy silver fur and ears that seemed too large for her head, looking up at Lyra with wide eyes full of wonder. "Are you really a human?" the little one asked, in accented but understandable common speech. "My mother told me stories about humans, about how they fought our warriors to a standstill, even though they are so small and soft." Lyra knelt down so that she was at eye level with the cub, something that seemed to shock the others who were watching. "Human," she confirmed with a gentle smile. "And what is your name, little one?" "I am Reska," the cub answered, her tail swishing behind her with nervous energy. "And I am the smallest in my litter, so the others say I will never be a great warrior like my mother." "Being great is not about being big or strong," Lyra said softly, reaching out slowly and carefully to touch the cub's fuzzy ear. "Being great is about having a heart that never quits." Reska's eyes went even wider at the touch, because Kaylori did not show such gentle affection outside of their immediate family units. "You are strange," the cub declared, "but I think I like you." The other cubs began to crowd around then, their fear fading as curiosity took over, asking questions about Earth and humans and why Lyra did not have fur or claws or a tail. She answered every question with patience and warmth, learning their names one by one as the evening wore on. Largest of the cubs, with bronze fur and a nervous habit of looking at the ground whenever anyone spoke too loudly, and Kyla, a quick and clever female who seemed to understand everything instantly but pretended otherwise. There was Morrow and his twin brother Kale, who finished each other's sentences and moved in perfect sync. And there were Vessa and Thorn and Janara and all the rest, each one unique and special in their own way. By the time the night bells rang and the cubs were called to their sleeping chambers, something had changed in the air between them. Lyra walked back to her quarters with a strange feeling in her chest, a warmth that she had not felt since before the war, since before she had become so hard and cold just to survive. These cubs were not her soldiers or her crew members. They were children, innocent and curious and full of potential. And she realized with sudden clarity that she would do anything to protect them. She did not know then that she would be tested on that promise sooner than she could have ever imagined. She did not know that enemies were already watching from the cold darkness between the stars, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. All she knew was that 12 cubs had looked at her with trust and wonder, and that was enough to make her feel like a guardian again, instead of just a survivor. Tomorrow she would begin her lessons, and she would teach them everything she knew about history and math and science. But more than that, she would teach them something that the Kaylori had never thought to teach their young, something that humans understood in their very bones. She would teach them about the power of a gentle heart and the strength that comes from protecting others. And she would show them that being soft was not the same as being weak. The twin suns rose again, and a new chapter began. 6 months passed on Verith Prime, and the Eastern Nursery Hold became a place of warmth and laughter that had never existed there before. Lyra had transformed the cold stone classroom into something alive and wonderful, hanging colorful charts on the walls and filling shelves with books and puzzles and games that she had ordered from across the galaxy. The cubs no longer looked at her with suspicion or confusion. Instead, they rushed to greet her each morning with excited yips and wagging tails, crowding around her legs and begging her to tell them more stories about distant worlds and ancient heroes. She taught them mathematics using games and challenges that made learning feel like play, and she taught them galactic history, not as a list of dates and battles, but as a collection of stories about real people who had faced impossible odds and found ways to survive. But the most important lessons were the ones that were not in any textbook. Lyra noticed things about her cubs that no one else seemed to see, small details that told her everything about who they really were beneath their proud exteriors. She noticed that Torvon flinched whenever voices were raised, shrinking into himself despite being the largest cub in the class, and she realized that his size had made others expect him to be fierce and brave, when he was actually gentle and easily frightened, began speaking to him in soft tones and giving him tasks that required care rather than strength. And slowly he began to stand taller and meet her eyes when he spoke. She noticed that Killa, who was clearly the smartest cub she had ever met, deliberately gave wrong answers on tests and pretended not to understand lessons that Lyra knew she had already mastered. When Lyra asked her about it privately, the young female looked away and admitted that being too smart made the others uncomfortable, and that she did not want to stand out. "Where I come from," Lyra told her gently, "we have a saying that a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And your brilliance does not take anything away from your friends, but instead gives them a light to follow." Killa thought about that for a long time, and the next day she answered every question correctly, with her head held high. Most of all, Lyra noticed little Reska, the smallest cub with the patchy silver fur, who had taken to following the human teacher everywhere, like a shadow. During rest periods, Reska would curl up against Lyra's side and fall asleep purring softly, something that was supposed to be shameful for a Kalori cub to do with anyone outside their immediate family. The other cubs pretended to be disgusted by this behavior, calling Reska soft and babyish. But Lyra saw how they watched with longing in their eyes. So she introduced them to something called hugging. "Humans do this to show that we care about someone," she explained, wrapping her arms around a very confused Torvin. "It is a way of saying that you are safe with me, and that I am glad you are here." The cubs found this concept bizarre and somewhat horrifying at first, because Kalori did not embrace except during very private family moments. But Reska threw herself into Lyra's arms immediately, and then Killa tentatively joined in, and before long, the entire class was participating in what they called the human warmth ritual, whenever they thought no adults were watching. One evening, as the cubs settled down for story time, Reska asked a question that made everyone go quiet. "Teacher Lyra, what do humans do when they are afraid?" Lyra considered the question carefully before answering, because she knew that fear was considered shameful in Kalori culture, a weakness to be hidden and overcome through force of will. "We feel it," she said honestly. "We let the fear wash through us like a wave, and we accept that it is there." The cubs looked horrified. "But then what?" Torvan asked with wide eyes. "How do you make it go away?" "We do not always make it go away," Lyra admitted. "Sometimes the fear stays with us, sitting in our stomachs like a cold stone. But we act anyway, because there are things more important than being afraid." "That sounds terrible," Reska whispered. "It is terrible," Lyra agreed. "It is also why humans keep getting back up, no matter how many times we are knocked down, because we have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more." She told them stories then, not about great human victories or powerful weapons, but about ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. She told them about the ancient warriors at a place called Thermopylae, who stood against an army of thousands, knowing they would die, just to give their people time to escape. She told them about firefighters who ran into burning buildings while everyone else ran out, climbing toward danger to save strangers they had never met. She told them about medics on battlefields who crawled through explosions and gunfire to reach wounded soldiers, armed with nothing but bandages and the stubborn refusal to let anyone die alone. She told them about parents who had lifted impossible weights to save their children, doing things that science said could not be done, powered by nothing but love and desperation. The cubs listened with wide eyes and open mouths, their tails still and their ears pointed forward. "In Kalori culture," Moro said slowly, "we fight because we are strong, and because the strong must dominate the weak." "In human culture," Lyra replied, "we fight because we have to, because there is something behind us worth dying for, and the weakest human becomes dangerous when you threaten what they love." Torvin, who rarely spoke during group discussions, raised his hand timidly. "Yes, Torvin? I think I understand now," he said in his quiet voice, "why the matriarch fears you. Because you are not dangerous like a predator hunting prey, but like a mother protecting her young, and that kind of dangerous has no limits." Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes, and she did not hide them, because she wanted the cubs to see that crying was not weakness. "You are very wise," she told him, "and I think you understand humans better than many humans understand themselves." That night, as she walked the cubs to their sleeping chambers, Reska grabbed her hand and held it tight. "Teacher Lyra?" "Yes, little one?" "Will you always be here to protect us?" Lyra knelt down and looked into those amber eyes that had become so precious to her over the past 6 months. "I cannot promise to always be here," she said honestly, "because life is uncertain, and none of us know what tomorrow will bring. But I can promise you this: as long as I am breathing, I will stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you. And even if I fall, I will fall facing the enemy with my arms spread wide to shield you." Reska threw her small arms around Lyra's neck and held on tight. "I want to be like you when I grow up," the cub whispered, "not big and scary like a warrior, but brave and warm. Guardian." "You already are," Lyra whispered back. "You just do not know it yet." She tucked the cubs into their beds that night with a song from Earth, a lullaby about a mother promising to catch her child if they fell. And the young Kaylori fell asleep to the sound of her soft human voice, filling the darkness with warmth. None of them knew that far above their world, in the cold space between stars, something ancient and hungry was watching. None of them knew that their lessons in courage would soon be tested in ways they could never have imagined. For now, they slept peacefully, dreaming of a universe where the soft could be strong, and the small could be brave. And Lyra watched over them like a guardian angel, ready for whatever might come. The Sketh Collective had been waiting in the darkness for 30 years, hiding in the cold spaces between stars where no one thought to look, breeding and evolving and planning their revenge against the species that had stopped their great expansion. They were a hive mind, millions of creatures sharing a single vast consciousness that thought in patterns no individual being could understand, and they had learned from their defeat at human hands. They had learned that the Kaylori were the greatest warriors in the sector, and that breaking the Kaylori would open the door to conquering everything else. But they had also learned that the Kaylori had one weakness, one soft spot in their armor of claws and fangs: their cubs. Kaylori young took a full decade to develop their natural weapons, spending those years soft and vulnerable and utterly dependent on adult protection. And the Sketh understood that destroying the cubs would break the spirit of even the greatest warriors. Mightiest warrior race. So they waited and watched and planned. And on a quiet morning, when the twin suns rose over Verith Prime like they had a million times before, the Sketh finally struck. Lyra was in the middle of teaching a lesson about Earth geography when the first alarms began to scream. The sound was unlike anything she had heard before, a deep howling wail that made the stone walls vibrate and sent the cubs scrambling toward her in panic. "Teacher Lyra," Reska cried out, grabbing onto her leg with trembling paws, "what is happening?" Before Lyra could answer, the building shook with a massive impact that knocked half the cubs off their feet. And through the high windows, she could see streaks of fire crossing the sky as something fell toward the planet's surface. Drop pods. She recognized them instantly from her years in the military, and her blood went cold as she understood what was happening. "Everyone stay calm," she said in a voice that did not shake, despite the terror flooding through her veins. "We need to get to the safe room right now." She herded the cubs toward the reinforced chamber at the back of the nursery hold, counting heads as they ran to make sure no one was left behind. Torvon was carrying little Vessa, who had twisted her ankle in the chaos, and Kyla was helping the twins move faster. And Reska refused to let go of Lyra's hand, even as they ran. They made it to the safe room just as the blast doors began closing automatically, sealing them inside a chamber of thick metal and stone, designed to withstand almost anything. "We are safe here," Lyra told the cubs, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. "The warriors will fight off whatever is attacking, and then they will come for us." But even as she spoke, she heard sounds from outside that made her heart sink. Chittering and clicking, a horrible alien noise that she remembered from her years as a baby prisoner, and the screams of Kalori warriors being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The Sketh were already inside the building. "Teacher Lyra," Keela said in a quiet voice that trembled only slightly, "I have been studying the defense systems of this building, and I know that these blast doors were designed to resist Kalori weapons, not Sketh acid." Lyra looked at her brightest student with new respect and growing dread. "How long do we have?" "Based on the sounds I am hearing, maybe 20 minutes before they burn through. Maybe less if there are enough of them." The cubs began to cry then, huddling together in a pile of fur and fear, their eyes fixed on the door that was the only thing standing between them and the monsters outside. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment and let the fear wash through her like she had taught her students. She felt it all, the terror of what was coming, the helplessness of being trapped, the desperate wish that she had a weapon or armor or anything that could make a difference. She let the fear pass through her, and when she opened her eyes, she was calm. "Listen to me," she said, kneeling down to meet the cubs at their level. "I need all of you to be brave right now, braver than you have ever been." "We are not warriors," Torvon whispered. "We are just cubs." "You are not just anything," Lyra said firmly. "You are my students, and I have taught you that courage is not about being big or strong. It is about standing when you want to run." She began moving around the room, gathering anything that could possibly be used as a weapon or barrier. There was a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, and she pulled it free with a grunt of effort. There was a metal chair that had been bolted to the floor for emergencies, and she wrenched it loose with strength born of desperation. There were storage crates and equipment cases that could be stacked into a barricade, and she directed the older cubs to help her pile them near the door. "What are you doing?" Reska asked with wide eyes. "I am buying us time," Lyra replied, "and when those doors break, I need all of you to stay behind this barricade and do not come out no matter what happens. Do you understand?" "But Teacher Lyra," Morrow protested, "you cannot fight the Sketh alone." "I am not planning to win," she admitted. "I am planning to make them pay for every inch of ground until help arrives." The sound of acid, hissing against metal, filled the air as the Sketh began burning through the blast doors, and the cubs pressed closer together in terror. Lyra stood at the barricade, fire extinguisher in one hand and broken chair leg in the other, positioning herself between her students and the enemy. "Remember everything I taught you," she said without turning around. "Remember that being afraid is okay as long as you act anyway. That the strongest thing a person can do is protect someone they love. And remember that a small thing with a big heart can change the universe." "We are scared," Reska whimpered. "I know, little one," Lyra said softly. "I am scared too, but I am still here, and I will not leave you." The blast doors began to glow red as the acid ate through the metal, and Lyra could see shapes moving in the smoke beyond, chitinous bodies with too many limbs and eyes that gleamed with hungry intelligence. She thought about Earth and the family she had left behind so many years ago. She thought about the soldiers she had commanded and the battles she had survived. She thought about 12 cubs who had changed her heart and given her something worth dying for. "I love you," she said to the children behind her. "Every single one of you, and no matter what happens today, I want you to know that being your teacher has been the greatest honor of my life." Doors buckled inward with a screech of tortured metal. The Sketh were coming, and Lyra Chen, a small soft human with no claws and flat teeth and skin that could tear at the slightest touch, raised her makeshift weapons and prepared to hold the line. Behind her, 12 cubs watched their guardian stand alone against the darkness. They did not know yet what they would learn from watching her fight. They did not know yet how her courage would transform them. All they knew was that their teacher was not running, and somehow that made them feel just a little bit braver, too. The blast doors exploded inward, and the Sketh poured through like a flood of nightmares made flesh. They were horrifying creatures, with bodies covered in hard black shells and too many legs that clicked against the stone floor, their heads crowned with clusters of gleaming eyes, and their mouths filled with dripping mandibles that could crush bone like dry twigs. The first one through the door was fast, faster than anything that size should be, but Lyra was ready. She swung the fire extinguisher with all her strength and caught the creature across its head, sending it tumbling backward into its companions with a spray of dark ichor. "Stay behind the barricade," she screamed at the cubs without looking back. Another Sketh lunged at her from the left, and she jammed the broken chair leg into the gap between its head and body, feeling the wood sink deep into something vital. The creature shrieked and fell, but there were already 3 more climbing over the bodies of the fallen. Lyra fought like she had never fought before, not with skill or training, but with raw, desperate fury, swinging and stabbing and kicking at anything that came close. She sprayed chemical foam into clicking eyes and shattered antennae with wild strikes. And every time a Sketh fell, she stepped over its body and kept fighting. Behind her, the cubs watched in terrified wonder as their soft-skinned teacher became something they had never seen before. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds where clawed limbs had found their mark, and her left arm hung at a wrong angle where a mandible had caught her shoulder. But she did not stop. "You will not touch them," she screamed at the swarm. "You will have to kill me first." The Sketh hive mind processed this strange data with something like confusion. This was supposed to be easy prey, a soft creature with no natural weapons, protecting young that could not fight back. Instead, they found a monster wearing human skin, a thing that bled and screamed but would not fall. 5 of their drones were dead, then 10, then 15, all killed by a single small being with nothing but primitive tools. Lyra could feel her strength fading as blood poured from her wounds, and every breath sent fire through her chest where something inside had broken. But she thought of the cubs behind her, of Reska and Torvin and Kyla and all the rest, and she found more strength that she did not know she had. A Sketh blade limb sliced across her thigh, cutting deep into the muscle, and she screamed but did not fall. She answered with a strike that crushed the creature's skull and sent it crashing into the wall. "Teacher Lyra," she heard Reska crying behind her. "Please stop, please run, please." "I cannot run," she gasped out between swings, "because you are behind me, and there is nowhere for you to go." Made a decision then, recognizing that this single human was causing unacceptable losses, and it sent its best through the door. A warrior-caste Sketh, nearly 3 meters tall and covered in armor plates that ordinary weapons could not pierce, pushed through the swarm and fixed its many eyes on the bleeding human. Lyra looked up at the monster and felt her heart sink because she knew that she could not defeat this enemy, that her makeshift weapons would bounce off that armor like toys. But she did not step back. "Come on then," she whispered through bloody lips. "Let us see what you have got." The warrior charged, and Lyra met it head-on, because there was no other choice. The impact was like being hit by a transport vehicle, and she felt ribs crack and something in her chest tear as she was lifted off her feet and slammed into the barricade. But as she flew backward, she grabbed a shard of metal from the ruined blast door and drove it upward, into the only gap in the creature's armor, the soft spot beneath its mandibles where the neck met the head. The warrior-cast Sketh made a sound like nothing she had ever heard, a scream that was also surprise and pain, and something that might have been respect. It fell on top of her, crushing her beneath its massive weight, and Lyra felt the world going dark around the edges. She pushed with everything she had left, and managed to roll the dead creature off her body, crawling on hands and knees toward the barricade where her cubs were screaming. "Teacher Lyra!" Torvon was reaching over the barrier, trying to grab her. "Get up, please, get up!" More Sketh were pouring through the door, but they hesitated when they saw their warrior-cast champion lying dead on the floor. Lyra used that moment to drag herself behind the barricade, collapsing among the cubs who immediately surrounded her with shaking paws and tear-streaked fur. "No, no, no," Reska was sobbing, pressing her small paws against the terrible wound in Lyra's chest. "You have to be okay. You promised to protect us." "And I did," Lyra whispered, each word costing her more than the last. "But now you have to be brave for me." "We cannot be brave without you," Killa cried. "We are just cubs." Lyra reached up with a trembling hand and touched Reska's tear-streaked face. "Listen to me," she managed to say. "I need you to remember what I taught you. Do not be afraid of being afraid. Just act anyway." "But what can we do?" Torvin asked desperately. "We have no claws. Our fangs are soft. We are not warriors." Lyra smiled then, and it was the most beautiful and terrible smile any of them had ever seen. "Neither was I," she whispered. "I was just someone who refused to stop." Her eyes began to close, and the cubs screamed and shook her and begged her to stay with them. "Do not cry for me," she breathed out, so softly that they had to lean close to hear. "Make them sorry they ever came here. Make them understand what they have done." Her hand fell from Reska's face, and her eyes closed, and the cubs felt the moment their teacher slipped away into the darkness. Reska threw back her head and howled, a sound of pure grief that echoed through the chamber and made even the Sketh pause. The other cubs joined her, their voices rising in a chorus of loss and pain that seemed to shake the very walls. They cried for their teacher, their guardian, their mother and everything but blood. They cried until they had no tears left to shed. And then, slowly, as the Sketh began moving toward the barricade again, something changed in the eyes of 12 young cubs. The grief was still there, raw and burning, but something else was growing alongside it. Something their teacher had planted in their hearts during 6 months of lessons and stories and hugs. Humans knew very well, but that the Sketh had never encountered before. It was the cold, fierce determination that comes when you have lost everything except the person standing beside you. It was the rage that burns when someone hurts the one you love. It was the knowledge that you are going to die, but deciding to make it cost the enemy dearly. Reska looked at the approaching Sketh, then looked at her fallen teacher, then looked at her clutchmates. She did not run, the smallest cub said in a voice that shook but did not break, so we will not run either. And 12 young cubs with no claws and soft fangs and bodies too small to fight turned to face the enemy. The Sketh moved toward the barricade, with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was helpless. The cubs were small and soft. Their claws were blunt nubs that could barely scratch. Their fangs had not yet hardened into the killing weapons they would one day become. And they could not produce the fear roar that made adult Kaelori so terrifying in battle. There was nothing these children could do against a swarm of armored killing machines. Nothing except stand. Reska positioned herself at the front of the group, her small body trembling from head to tail, but her feet planted firmly on the ground. Torvin moved up beside her, the largest of the cubs, but also the gentlest, his nervous nature replaced by something hard and cold. Keela took her place on the other side, her brilliant mind calculating odds that she knew were hopeless, but refusing to let that stop her. The twins stood together as they always did, and behind them, Vesa and Thorn and Janara and all the rest formed a ragged line in front of their fallen teacher. "Remember what she taught us," Reska said to her clutchmates. "Courage is not about being strong. It is about deciding that something matters more than fear." The Sketh were close now, so close that the cubs could smell the chemical stench of their bodies and see the gleam of hunger in their clustered eyes. And then, Reska did something that changed everything. She growled. It was not an impressive sound by any measure, a high-pitched wavering noise that came from a throat too young to produce the deep rumbles of an adult Kalori. But she growled anyway. And one by one, the other cubs joined her. 12 young voices rose in a chorus of defiance, a sound that should have been pathetic, but was somehow beautiful in its desperate courage. They bared their soft fangs at the enemy. They flexed their blunt claws of their fallen guardian and dared the Sketh to come closer. The hive mind processed this unexpected data and found itself confused for the second time that day. This was not how prey behaved. Prey ran and screamed and begged for mercy, but these small, soft creatures were doing none of those things. They were standing their ground and making threat sounds, acting like warriors when they were clearly helpless. For 3 long seconds, the Sketh swarm hesitated, trying to understand this anomaly that did not fit into any of their calculations. 3 seconds was all it took. The outer wall of the chamber exploded inward with a blast of plasma fire and flying stone, and through the smoke and debris came the most welcome sight the cubs had ever seen. Elder Matriarch Serena herself led the charge, her ancient body moving with the deadly grace of a master warrior, her claws tearing through Sketh drones like they were made of paper. Her came a dozen elite guards, the greatest fighters of the Kalori people, and they fell upon the swarm with a fury that shook the building to its foundations. The Sketh tried to fight back, but they were caught between the warriors outside and the cubs who refused to flee. And within minutes, the last of them lay dead on the blood-soaked floor. Serena surveyed the carnage with eyes that had seen 1,000 battles, counting the bodies of the Sketh and noting the positions where they had fallen. Then her gaze found the cubs, still standing in their ragged line, still growling even though the enemy was dead. And behind them, lying in a pool of human blood, she saw the soft-skinned teacher, who had asked to be trusted with Kalori young. "Get the medics," she commanded, her voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "Tell them we have a human who needs emergency stasis, and tell them to hurry because I do not think she has much time." Came running, lifting Lyra's broken body onto a floating stretcher and rushing her away to the healing chambers. Serena knelt down among the cubs, who finally stopped growling and collapsed into shaking piles of fur and exhaustion. "Tell me what happened here," she said gently, in a voice that none of them had ever heard her use before. So they told her. They told her about the Sketh breaking through and Teacher Lyra standing alone at the door, with nothing but a fire extinguisher and a broken chair. They told her about watching their soft-skinned guardian fight like a demon, killing enemy after enemy even as she bled from terrible wounds. They told her about the warrior caste Sketh, and how Lyra had charged it knowing she could not win, and how she had killed it anyway at the cost of her own body. They told her about her final words, about being brave and making the enemy sorry. "And then we growled," Reska finished, her voice hoarse, "from crying and defiance, because she taught us that you do not have to be strong to stand. You just have to refuse to run. Serena looked at these cubs, these children who had stood against nightmares, with nothing but courage, and she felt something shift in her ancient warrior's heart. "She taught you well," the matriarch said softly, "better than any Kalori teacher ever could." 3 weeks later, Lyra Chen opened her eyes in a medical chamber filled with soft golden light. For a moment, she did not know where she was or what had happened. But then memory came flooding back, and she tried to sit up in panic. "The cubs!" she gasped out. "Where are the cubs?" "They are here," a familiar deep voice rumbled, and Lyra turned her head to find Serena standing beside her bed, with an expression that might have been a smile. "They have barely left your side since you came out of stasis." Lyra looked down and discovered that her bed was completely empty, surrounded by sleeping cubs, their furry bodies piled on top of each other, and pressed against her like they were afraid she might disappear if they stopped touching her. Reska was curled up against Lyra's side, her small paw wrapped around the human's fingers even in sleep. "They told me everything," Serena continued, "about how you held the corridor alone against the swarm, about how you killed a warrior caste with nothing but a piece of scrap metal, about how you used your dying breath to teach them courage." "I was just doing what any guardian would do," Lyra whispered, her voice weak but steady. "No," Serena said firmly. "You were doing what humans do, something that we Kalori never understood until now." The ancient matriarch knelt beside the bed, bringing her massive head down to Lyra's level. "I asked you once why we should trust our cubs to you, and you said that humans do not need claws to protect what they love. And I did not forget. Understand then, but I understand now." She placed her giant paw over Lyra's bandaged hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a deadly creature. "You do not protect because you are strong," Serena rumbled. "You are strong because you protect." In the years that followed, the story of the soft-skinned guardian spread across Verith Prime and beyond. They told of the human who held the corridor with nothing but broken furniture and stubborn spite. They told of the cubs who learned to growl. And when Kalori warriors went into battle, they no longer roared the deep thundering roar of predators hunting prey. Instead, they growled, a deliberate and defiant sound, a tribute to 12 children and 1 human who proved that true strength has nothing to do with claws. It was a promise, a reminder, a way of saying to every enemy, "We are not strong because we have weapons. We are strong because we will never stop protecting what we love." And somewhere on Varath Prime, in a nursery hold that had been rebuilt and restored, an aging human woman continued to teach young cubs that the softest heart can hold the fiercest courage. She taught them mathematics and history and science. But most of all, she taught them to stand. And they never forgot.